I think it's hard to build off of.
What do you mean?
It's,
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I think it's kind of like looking for an answer that you can almost never find.
Well, there are a couple of things as to why someone pursues philosophy. I mean, you don't go out there pursuing marriage. What usually happens is you sit in a class or somewhere and you look to your left and someone just looks relatively decent, interesting. You approach them, you say hello. It's very casual. And while the two of you are having a conversation, it never occurs to you that things may actually get very, very serious. But the conversation is interesting, she looks a little interesting, and you summon up the courage and you ask, for a second date or a coffee or whatever. She says yes, and before you know it, you're hanging out with her like, thank you. You're hanging out with her like 5-6 hours a day or every other day. And, at a certain point, you see her talking to another guy and you're jealous and you don't really know why. And you sit back and you say, do I really feel like that about her? And the answer is, well, yes. How did it happen? It's magic. And then days pass. Hello, Abby. How are you doing? I'm well. I hear Alexis had her child. She's healthy? Not Alexis, the child.
I think that's fine.
They're both good? She cute? Not Alexis, the baby. Healthy? Her name is?
Nina.
Mina. Sophia would have been nice. I mean, Elham is nice. Mina is good. How's Alessandro?
I haven't seen them.
Oh, you haven't seen them yet. Is she home or is she still at the hospital? Yeah. Yeah, and so one day she says she wants to leave you and you cry like a baby. Don't leave me, don't leave me. I'll do this and I'll do that. And before you know it, you're married with 25 kids. And philosophy happens in just the same way, maybe you'll wake up in a, strange mood. Maybe you're suffering from some social chaos, some political reason. You want to know, let's just say you take a sociology class or poli-sci class, and the topic of the day happens to be, Palestine. And you happen to be African American. Let's just say generically you're studying African American studies, and your instructor happens to be somewhat interesting, animated, and he begins or she begins to talk about how the state of Israel was created. And then you begin to contemplate about power, about why is it that all these Jews from Europe are now migrating to Palestine, a place they've never been, a place they've never seen, some never even heard of. It's not even a Middle Eastern problem. And yet, people in power just pack these people up and send them to Palestine. They give him a tiny portion, and they give him a bigger portion, bigger portion, bigger portion. In a couple of years, you realize there are almost 1 million Palestinian refugees kicked out. And one day you look yourself in the mirror and you realize, man, you're a black American. The same thing happened to you and your people. And then you go to UC Berkeley and study Middle Eastern studies. You know, and maybe you convert to Islam, or maybe you'll just remain a Christian or a Sikh or a Buddhist, whatever, but then that's what you'll teach. And then in your 40s or 50s or 60s, you walk in the classroom and someone will say to you, is your wife Middle Eastern? You say, no. Your parents Middle Eastern? No. Have you ever been to the Middle East? No. You speak Arabic? Yes. And you have your PhD in Middle Eastern studies? Yes. How? Why? And it's the same thing. So if you're curious as to why I studied philosophy, just like anything else, there's a history behind it. You know, you study the history and you'll understand why usually people end up where they end up. Yeah. Did you have a question? Yeah. No. How about you, Alham? Are you fasting? Sophia, you have any questions? Go ahead, Alham. I'm sorry? Abi? Yeah. Say again?
What do you think about job opportunities when you graduate?
Oh, hello. Job with an AA, a BA, a master's, a PhD, a postdoc.
Like, or the nature is like, do you think nature is like based on like
Oh,
putting together a job?
you should do computer science. I'm sorry?
Like, not, what's that? Job.
Computer science is good. Carpentry is good. We don't want to go into social sciences. No psychology, no philosophy, no humanities, no religious studies, no political science, unless you have a real passion for them and you can't see yourself in any other, branch of learning. Business is good. Accounting is good. Nursing is also good. It depends on what sort of a nurse you want to be. If you want to be a physician's assistant, for example, that's like a 4 or 5 year process, maybe longer. The money is good. You get paid, 150, 200, 250 a year. Not bad. But you could just do your bachelor's in computer science at UC Berkeley, get a job at Google, and in a couple of years with some experience, you make about 300,000-400,000 a year. I mean, being a professional prostitute is always, it pays off well. Computer science is really good. Or you could just find a rich boyfriend. Make sure you guys don't do a prenup. And when you realize that he's a little incompetent, just poison him. And then you can have all this money and then go for love somewhere out there in the world. That's probably the best option. Oh, you've thought about it. Good for you. Nathan, what's going on, man?
Another day on the struggle bus.
Yes. Abi, anything you want to talk about?
Could you talk about what it means to have power
As a woman? Like physical power? Like power over your husband? That comes naturally. Organically. You don't need to like go to school for that. And in fact, that's the only way a marriage survives, really. That the man is just has a good amount of fear of his wife. All those things aside, in 2007, I resigned from Laney. I'd been here for 3 years. It was my last year to be tenured. I applied to a job in Sacramento, where my parents live, Folsom Lake College. Just did it for fun. You know, walked the grounds, that particular campus, and it was beautiful, you know. And so they offered me the position, I took it. What I didn't know was that it is surrounded by churches, Mormons. Hello, saw you yesterday. But before leaving here, the president, Frank Chong, came down to my office and said, listen, stay at Laney and I'll make you dean. You know, as a faculty, you make about 40, 50,000. As a dean, you make like 150. Yeah. And you sit back and you say, well, that's money, gives you a lot of power. You're also a dean. And they can't really fire you. If they do, you can always go back to being an instructor. But what comes with that power, becoming a dean? You sit in your office. We don't deal with ideas anymore. That's dead. You know, you have to put it in a coffin, nail it, bury it. And you talk about the colors of the bathroom doors, talk about enrollment, how many classes can each department teach, those things. I sit back and I say, do I really want to do that? I mean, do I really want to become like a slave sitting in my office and talking about ridiculous, stupid things? Necessary, don't get me wrong. They're necessary things. But do you have the stomach for it? Now, there are two paths you can take. The first is you say, you know what? I became interested in philosophy when I was like 11. And I didn't really want to go to school. In fact, I was a dropout. Then I met Hussein. He resurrected my passion for philosophy in a slightly different way. And he told me that if I don't go to school, I can't go to his house anymore, be around him anymore. So I went there. Ideas are great, but you know, there's also what we call ludus, which is lust. And the idea of becoming a dean, having power over like 50, 60, 70 instructors, that's huge. From making, hello Oscar, from making like, you know, 50,000 to making 150,000, that's also a huge jump. It's a lot of power. But in getting that particular power, you lose some things. You know, I think Henry David Thoreau was right that every new thing that comes into your life, you gain one thing, but you lose 50 things. You know, I didn't really much care about it. I mean, I did way back then about being around students, being around ideas, hanging out with them, having dinner with them, lunch with them. You know. I ultimately said no. I walked away. Yeah. So for the longest time in our history, social history, women and men have had separate roles. That women stay home. For whatever the reasons, their bodies are made to produce babies. And once you have a child, something about you changes as a woman. I'm not one, so I can't tell you if that's true. And I think the Greeks, to some extent, had this figured out a long time ago. Storga, that's one of the branches of love that is called parental or familial love. It's the love that a child has for his or her parents, and the love that mothers have for their kids. Fathers, they're usually delayed. It takes a long time for kids to kind of be able, or they even desire to hang out with the dads. So the father has to wait for 10, 15 years until the kids come to realize, oh, I didn't know I have a father too. Let me love him a little bit. And you stay home, you take care of your kids, you protect your kids. You become basically a king or a queen of your domain. The house becomes your kingdom. And there's a wonderful story that comes from the Albatross community in certain parts of Africa. And I'm sure you've heard the story where the man goes out, does whatever he does, calls the woman and says, I'm coming home, honey. And so the woman stands outside with a bucket of water. And when the man reaches home, stands outside of the door, the woman goes out, washes his feet, washes his hands, washes his face, and then dries them. He walks in. Then he eats first. She eats after him. He sits on a chair. She sits on the ground. And then when it's time for him to get up, he places his hand on top of her head, helps himself up, and moves around. Now, if you don't know much about the social role playing that women and men have played in a very traditional setting for the past many, many thousands of years, as a Westerner, you look at the story and you say, wow, men are this way and the culture is that way. They're so backwards. We should go on there and give them democracy and feminism and all that. But a closer look at the story is, what does a man do when he goes out? Man is corrupt, he's vicious, he's vulgar. He falls victim to all sorts of temptations. He's filled with all the wrong kinds of greed and lust and vengeance and violence. He's unjust, unfair. And the truth is, you can't walk into your home having those things inside you. A woman needs to be out, knowing full well that this is her kingdom, and her kingdom cannot be contaminated by the presence of a man in whom such toxic qualities exist. So she baptizes his feet. And again, feet, hands, eyes, they're all symbols. ز دست دیده و دل هر دو فریاد، هر آنچه دیده بیند دل کند یاد، بسازم خنجری نیشه ز فولاد، زنم بر دیده تا دل گردد آزاد. That my eyes look that way, all of a sudden they desire something, a signal is sent to the feet. Go to the place that the eyes, have fallen victim to temptation. And then when the feet gets you there, there's another signal, but this signal reaches to your hands. Touch the thing that the eyes saw. And all of a sudden you realize that your eyes, your feet, and your hands are all culprits. They connect you to a world that kind of clips your wings, mutes your voice. There's no creativity about you. You become part of the world. And the function of the world is to create, to allow what it has created to live a few days and then to suffocate and kill it. And so the woman knows all this really, really well. He says if a man wants to come into the house, he needs to be baptized. So washes the feet, washes the hands, washes the face. And then the man is not worthy to sit on the ground, because the earth and the woman have very many things in common. I mean, you're a mother, you know this really, really well. If your child looks at you and says, Mom, you suck as a human being, sure, you may become angry, you may even become very disappointed, you may even get depressed because of what you've heard your son say to you. But your ability to forget and your ability to forgive and your ability to kind of generate compassion, generosity, beautiful. This is a gift for you. If on the other hand, your son or your daughter says the same thing to the father, hello, you probably won't talk to the child for a while, And you realize you pee on the earth. It's something that the Hindus kind of told us many, many thousands of years ago. The earth is really interesting. You plant poop in it, it'll say fine. You pee on it, it'll say fine. You go to Home Depot, buy lilies and plant lilies in the ground, it says fine. It makes no difference. Or another analogy given to us by the Hindus, like the sun. It shines its rays both on the saint and the wicked. No difference. So the man unworthy of sitting on the ground has no choice but to sit on the chair. And he eats first, just in case there is something wrong with the food. The food is there to get you sick. It should be the man who always gets sick and dies, not the woman. The woman is far too sacred. And the sacredness of women has been talked about in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Judaism, in Islam, in Christianity. I mean, some of the things that St. Paul talked about in regards to women and their potential of becoming good priests or pastors, incredible stuff, And so I say all of this because when you look out there in the world, it's man's creation. Everything you see out there is the creation of man, everything. From the most basic to the most complex, it's all men's creation. If you're worried about your kid's future, it's men's creation. If you're worried about media, men's creation. If you're worried about why people like to become billionaires and gazillionaires, men's desires. Our heroes, for the most part, are men, And now you say, as a woman, I want to walk into the world and I want to participate in the game that men, engage in. The truth is, well, if as a woman you want to engage in a world created, dominated, housed by men, you really need to get rid of some of the feminine qualities that live inside you. If they live inside you, Which means that, it happens to all of us, and you don't have to be a man or a woman for this stuff. I've talked about this countless times, that you have a part-time instructor, they have to beg for teaching assignments, and they apply for a full-time position, and they become a full-time instructor. No longer begging, You have the contract and you're promised 5 classes a semester. You're salary-based. Your pay is never going to change. In fact, every year, you're going to get a 2-3% increase, okay? And then after a while, you realize, well, you're really not good in the classroom. You suck as an instructor, or maybe you're just burnt out because you just have crummy students. You say, well, I don't really want to quit. Maybe I should kind of go into a different branch of education. So you become an administrator. And now you realize, well, there's budget cuts, and you have forgotten the fact that at one point in your life, as a professional instructor, you were once a part-time, begging for classes. You knew full well that if you don't get a class, you won't be able to pay rent. But now you have pen and a sheet of paper. All you got to do is cross a name. All you got to do is just change the numbers, and all of a sudden, a department that had like 5 part-time instructors, all of a sudden they're all canned, they're all tossed, trashed. And if one of them comes to you and says, you know what, I need a class, I just need to pay rent, you kind of look at this person and say, I'm sorry, we just don't have the budget for it. And you realize that your ability to be a bit more compassionate, generosity, and generous, and the thing is, as an administrator, There are always ways. You can kind of bend, hello Tyler, bend and break the rules, you know. And so, you got to get used to the fact that as a woman walking to a man's world, you're going to spend less time with your kids. These kids came out of you. Initially, you were happy, you rejoiced, celebrated this particular moment in this particular creation. But you are now a house divided. There's a part of you that says, I want to be a CEO. And there's a part of you that says, I want to be a mother. And these two worlds are going to collide, especially these days. And rightly so. Men suck. You don't have a culture that creates mature men. A woman has to wait for a long, long time to come across a man who's got a good head on his shoulder. You know, so you have a lot of components that you have to really study well. It's not a man's fault. It's not a woman's fault. It's the culture is what it is, you know. No longer is one paycheck enough for a life to survive. You need a lot of different things. And for you as a woman, even though you may want to stay home, you walk into the man's world and you say, little by little, you come to realize, you begin to be more irritable, more agitated. You have less patience for the nonsense of your kids. And I think emotionally and mentally, you're just rewired. That's how you survive in the man's world. You know, you begin to sleep around emotionally with things that are not passive, i.e. feminine, you know. And this idea that you have in the New Testament, if you want to look at this in a very like metaphoric, symbolic way, that human beings, their true evolution, their true maturity comes when the lion and the lamb can lay together. That there's a part of us that's aggressive, that's dominating, that's vengeful, that's violent. And there's a part of us that's passive, generous, lamb-like. So you have a part of you that's innocent, you know, that's pure. It's kind of like the Enkidu of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And there's a part of you that is like the initial life of our hero, King Gilgamesh. Now, I don't really know if anyone, especially these days, can get to this particular stage of their own evolution where the lion and the lamb, you know, where the Moses and the Jesus, where you can be, you know, in the first, the Surah Fatiha, the 7 verses of the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, you know, you have mercy and then you have compassion. Mercy is a masculine component. Compassion is a feminine component. Masculine is the judge. He can kind of hang you, but the judge also have this other component. He can also forgive you, exercise compassion. You know, that's how the Supreme Court is supposed to be. You know, mercy and compassion tempered. The scale is balanced. And that's a very, very difficult place to be. That as a woman, you're made to be passive because that's the only way your kids can feel safe around you. Men are not like that. You know, it's not true for all men, but for the most part, you know, 99.9% of men are very aggressive and combative, and it doesn't work well with kids as they're growing up. Women, very, very different. Okay, so when you kind of hear Muhammad saying, the Prophet of Islam, that if you want to truly experience paradise, look at the feet of any mother. And there you have it. You have submission there. You have, kind of like Jesus Christ, the kid slap her on the face every single moment, and yet the mother turns the other cheek. You know, fathers can't do that, not in a million years. Now, if you have studied the social component of your environment, the political component of your environment, and you also understand what it means to be a woman, depending on your culture and all that, and if you have trained yourself not to be tempted, I mean, read the stories of the Christian desert fathers. These are beautiful, like old or young men who come to realize that the world is filled with crap. They need to kind of wear a condom so that when they enter into the world, this condom protects them from becoming contaminated. They go through all these exercises and then they go back into the world and the world can't touch them. The only thing that the world has power over them often is lust. And this particular lust is not about money. It's not about worldly power. It's about women. So when the Buddha comes out of his enlightenment, he says, if the goddess Mara had tempted me with sex, I would have fallen victim. And that in itself is quite interesting, because in very, very conservative traditional environment where they understand the power that could be generated by the exchange of gazes or glances, man and a woman, in these cultures, men always stay here, women always stay there. These two worlds will never meet. If you want to say hello to a woman, your eyes are always gazed down. You never look her in the eyes. You never speak to her. Even her voice, even her lips, even her body, they're all powerhouses, that can topple a marriage, So the other thing you need to understand, if you as a woman, especially a married woman, want to kind of walk into a man's world, and these are things that none of us really kind of study unless some age has been given to you. You're like 80, 90, 100. You've become like a prodigal son where you thought that you know what to do with the power that life has given to you. You walk into life with all this power and you realize you make a mess of your entire life. And after a while you realize, well, relationships, the romantic kinds, eventually they fall victim to the politics of life. That this passion that once lived in the relationship is no longer there. And human beings, there is something about us that we want passion. We want to feel our own existence. We are born to be existentialists. We fight to come out because we're drowning on a daily basis from moment to moment. I mean, this class is boring. You keep looking at the clock, and I don't really blame you. Why? You may not be aware, but deep down you say, well, you know what? I just don't want to be bored anymore, And so it's something we talked about yesterday in my class, which is there's an episode in the TV show now, I think canceled, Young Sheldon. Great couple, married for a long time, 3 kids, churchgoer the woman is, the father is like a football coach, the kids are really good. At a certain point, the woman begins to like this pastor, and the man begins to like his neighbor. I think her name is Brenda. And it's a small town, so your name and your reputation mean everything. Once you lose your name, once you lose your reputation, it's kind of like what Shakespeare had mentioned. If you steal my watch, I don't become poor. If you steal my name, I truly become poor now. Your last name has your parents' history, has your culture's history. Mess that up and you have nothing. And so I don't know how people survive. I mean, I don't know how women survive being in a man's world. They really need to and it happens gradually. It's like a frog that gets cooked slowly without really noticing. At a certain point, you I think one of the ways that we can protect some of the feminine qualities that live inside you, be a mother for a number of years and have Hephaestus. Hephaestus is the ancient Greek god. He's a welder. We're in the car wash business. We've been for the past 40 years, and there are 2 kinds of weldings that you can do. You can either do just regular metal, and then you can do stainless steel welding. That requires a completely different set of instruments. Hephaestus, and once something is welded, you need to get a grinder or a really good saw, metal saw, to break things apart. I think if motherly qualities have been welded to you, you can walk into a man's world and you can act and behave very much like a man, very masculine way. But what Hephaestus or this motherly welding will do to you is it'll create inside you a good amount of guilt. Guilt will either punish you heavily to the point where you say, I don't think I want to do this anymore. Where you just go back and being an instructor, or you just go back and being a mother, or whatever. Or little by little, you try to do what Aesop had mentioned in his sour grape story. You turn the story on its head. That I love grapes, I want to eat some grapes, you see some grapes, you reach for the grapes, and you're a fox. Symbolic for the cunningness of human beings. You know, the way we justify things. After 5 hours of trying to reach the grapes and eat them, you realize, well, there's this fence, you know, you can't reach the grapes. The fence won't let you. And then you walk away very angry and frustrated and you scream, you know, the grapes are probably sour. You know, so God purposely put this grape in front of me so I wouldn't eat the grapes and suffer a stomachache. You know, that's what we do in life. You know, you're an incompetent human being, your wife or your man leaves you and you say, well, you know, they don't really appreciate me. The truth is, you suck as a human being. They shouldn't be around you in the first place. But the only way you are able to save yourself from, you know, jumping from a bridge is by turning the story or creating a narrative that fits you. You know, when a man shows interest in our young Muslim friend there, the first thing that the parents are going to ask is, oh wow, you have such fair skin, such beautiful eyes. How you get that? The parents don't care. The first thing that the parents are going to ask is, do you have, and she's from Yemen, so most Yemenis are into business. Parents probably know. You're probably like a high school dropout. Do you have a shop? Do you have money? You know, because they don't really much care about love and romanticism. For them, that's just stupid. You know, what makes life go is money. Do you have money? Can you protect my daughter? Should she get pregnant, do you have enough funds to feed a family of 4 or 5 or 6? You know. So it's just complicated. I think today we don't really have much of a choice. A woman needs to go out and get a job. And God forbid if the woman is like talented and creative, and if she has like introverted components inside her, where she needs to feel that she's alive, that she needs to be creative. Just simply sitting home and cooking and cleaning and producing babies is not enough for her. You're in for a ride, you know, because she needs to go out there. She needs to be visible. She needs attention from other people. Her husband alone is not enough, you know. So, having said all of that, I must confess I have forgotten your question. So, yeah. So, and it's tough, you know. You're a woman and you're a mother and a housewife, and you feel bad for just being a mother and being a housewife. You look at other women, you know, they're CEOs and presidents and deans, and you say, well, I want that too. And so it's difficult to kind of fend off the temptation. Yeah, Nathan.
What do you think the world would look like if it was built by women? Bumper scenery. Like, I'm just thinking about like you're talking about the Inuit and gender roles there, and then seeing other hunter-gatherer societies where social hierarchies aren't necessarily dominated by men.
You know, your question is interesting as an experiment, a thought experiment. It's like, When I used to teach my social and political philosophy in-person classes, students would often say, what would the world look like without money? You know, or what do you think justice looks like? I think even if the world was to be run by women, there are certain issues that men have that women need to create a certain set of rules where those particular forces inside men need to be suppressed, repressed. So women in essence need to create some dictatorship of sorts until men gains enough maturity where they can just be on autopilot. They just know how to behave. You know, I mean, you look at young kids when they're born, the first few years of their life, they haven't been contaminated by society. They haven't really been contaminated by politics. And yet they are rowdy. They throw temper tantrums. They destroy things. We are in the business of destroying everything that we touch. You know, whether the world is governed by a man or a woman, it doesn't really matter very much. It takes us a long, and none of us in this class enjoy being held hostage. It's something, again, we talked about yesterday in the ethics class, which Isabel is in, which is, you know, the prodigal son story in the Gospel of Luke it's a really tragic story in the sense that you have one son who obeys his father. You know, it's like you go to school and you only focus on the books, but you have zero worldly wisdom. There's a point where books are no longer going to be interesting. You're going to walk into a world only to realize you have no idea how to function as a human being. You know, and your stupidity is going to punish you. And there's a point where you're going to say, man, I went to school, I got my PhD, and yet I just don't know how to talk to my wife or to my kids or to my parents, or I don't have any friends. I suck as a human being. Then you have 5 PhDs in a therapist's office because you want to commit suicide. Okay. I have a friend who works in the this particular branch at Stanford Hospital. She deals with people who are just psychologically broken. You know, she has a 12-hour shifts. And what she says to us all the time, she's my wife's sister. The people who come into our shop and occupy a bed for a few days and take a lot of pills to keep themselves from going completely mad, teachers, students, doctors, you know, Stanford Hospital. So that's one side of the story. You know, you bury your head in school, you graduate with a 4.5, you walk into the world and you realize you're just dysfunctional, you can't function. You don't know how the social world works, you kind of feel sad and depressed. Then you have the other fellow, the guy who throws a temper tantrum and goes out there and wastes all the money. At the end of it, he comes to realize he's made a lot of mistakes. You know, so whether the world is dominated by women or men, it ends up in the same place. You know, human beings do not come out with a know-how pamphlet. It's, you experiment with things. But, you know, for those of us who are parents, the prodigal son story is great. Just know the moment that you have a child, they will either say yes to you without understanding, that in itself creates a set of problems, or you have a child who will say no to you, and they want to create their own path, and they're going to create a mess. Either way, have an open door policy. They're both going to make lots of mistakes. They're both going to regret. They're both going to repent. Should they come to you, you know, in the act of repentance, invite them in. And that's really tough to do, especially for parents, for fathers. You know. But long story short, whether you're a man or a woman, you suck. Elham.
This is a question that's not my head, but why have men become more sensitive to it? Why do they make it more difficult for a woman to do it?
I don't really know what it means to be. Okay, the second part, I'm not going to even approach because I don't know. So let me tell you very, very briefly how the world used to look like for many thousands of years. And forgive me, I'm going to just tell you my own story. When I came to America, we had zero money. We lived in Davis, Cranbrook Courts. Every Saturday they used to give out free donuts and orange juice. And if you have no money, the only thing you can do is just steal. So you would go to the visiting area, Cranbrook Court apartments, and you would just take donuts. And at a certain point, the manager would look and say, I think you guys have had enough donuts. That's like 50 donuts you've taken. That's enough. Then you go to Safeway and steal because you have no money. Then you work at Castilian, mopping floors and washing dishes. Then you work for Davis Motel. You're a maid. You clean rooms, you change bed sheets, you do laundry. You also steal. Then you work for Church's Fried Chicken. And you steal buckets of chickens. Then you work graveyard at Del Paso Heights Shell gas station. Then you tell your parents you want to do music, but they slap you rightly so you're an immigrant. You have no right to go into the creative arts. Your parents send you here for one reason: money, physical security. A father who had a relatively good job back home comes here and starts washing cars. And I don't know if you have researched this, but the worst or the lowest job you could ever have in 1986 was being a car washer. Now, here from the Middle East, our name and our reputation, they are all that we have. A 50-year-old man comes from Iran and he begins to wash cars. He doesn't speak English. My mom doesn't speak English, yet they wash cars. And the Middle East has a certain bias towards Westerners, and rightly so. They're justified. You know, all the anger that Middle East has towards the Western world, fully justified. All the anger that the Middle East has towards the creation of the state of Israel, fully justified. You know, and so they have to endure being laughed at, ridiculed by the customers. You know, pronouncing the words wrong. I still do to this day, even though I've been here for about 50 years. You know, there are certain words I try to not speak of because I can't pronounce them the right way. And you realize I'm only, 63. And in my short, pathetic 63 years of life, if I didn't have a thick skin, if my history did not create a thick skin for me, I would have probably been depressed somewhere, maybe committed suicide. And the point I'm trying to make is, if we didn't have a middle class, you only had two segments in society. You had the rich and you had the poor. That's it. And the poor were really, really poor. And the rich, they were okay. And to be poor and to survive, you can't whine, you can't scream, you can't cry. And if you did, people will slap you, kick you. In fact, the culture would never teach you, train you to kind of just talk about your issues. You know? No one in the Middle East talks about their issues. You have no right to talk about your issues. I mean, in Japan, for the longest time in their history, there is no word for I. I doesn't exist. You know, even now when we go to gatherings and you have like a Persian saying, well, I said this, all of us look at each other and say, why is he saying I? Who the hell do you think you are? You mean nothing. So even the word I in the Persian language, it doesn't exist. Oftentimes we say ma, we, us. I mean, just talking about yourself. But you don't say I, but you say we, you know. And you realize that you have a culture that creates a different human being. Sure, life craps on you on a daily basis. Just hold your shit together. You know, today the story is very, very different. Privilege has a lot to do with it. The very fact that parents spend a lot of time with their kids, you know, have a lot to do with it. The fact that the culture creates parents who are just paranoid and they do all sorts of things for their kids. The very fact that I can't even look at my students anymore and say, you know, God damn it, put your fucking phone away. Because the next thing that'll happen is I'll have to go to my dean's office because the student has complained. It's their right, it's their phone, it's their time, it's their this, it's their that. And you give incompetent people too many rights. You know, and I'm not talking about 18-year-olds. I mean, you take your kid to like Target. And how old is your kid? Like 6 months old. And the kid is sitting and crying. Now, you as like a 30-year-old mom or a dad, you're sitting on the floor with your 2-year-old kid. So, son, tell me, how are you feeling? Why are you feeling this way? And what you're doing, in essence, is you're training your kid to take their own emotions, their own traumas, their own stuff very, very seriously. And by the time they get to be 18, they're like the center of the universe. Should no one pay any attention to them, they're going to be crushed. And they need therapy or Prozac, you know. And this is a recent phenomenon, and I don't think we have the answers just yet. If my father dies, the culture has in place death and grieving rituals. We have poetry that talks about sadness. زمن بشنوی پیر آموزگار مکن تکیه بر گردش روزگار که این منزل درد و جای غم است در این دامگه شادمانی کم است. If you want to know what life is, the house of sadness and sorrow, do not seek happiness. That's for idiots. Imagine you're born in a culture that keeps feeding you these poems. You don't seek happiness. It doesn't exist. Because you understand the nature of life is just one of punishment. That's what life does on a daily basis. So bombs drop on your head. That's how it is. Cruelty, injustice, that's how it is. You know. So there are lots of things to consider. I mean, you as a woman are an awful time in human history. Privilege, technology, the sort of social forces, political forces. I don't really know how your kids are going to survive. Unless you take them to Yemen. And that's not too far off. Because there comes a point where you realize you love your kids more than you love your parents. You love your parents, But as a woman, as a mother, you want to protect your kids. So at a certain point, you look at your parents and say, you know what? Thank you for everything, but my husband and I and the kids are going back to this particular place. You know, we train them how to be a human being in the Middle East, and when they're like in their 30s or 40s, you bring them back to America. You probably won't do that, but you know, it's a nice fairy tale. And the other aspect of it, Rollo May is a guy, he's a psychologist, I think he's American. He's written lots of books. One of the best books that he wrote is called The Cry for Myth. There was a point in our culture, any culture I suppose, where you had myths, you had stories, that you actually believed in God, that you went to the church and you and companion would sit by the cross and say, only death do us part. It's a great story. And that story was like Hephaestus. It welded the two of you together, despite all the conflicts that a relationship will eventually have. Divorce was never in the picture. You know, you just knew how to survive. Once you begin to lose stories, you don't really have much of a foundation anymore. You have to make it as you go. You have to create stories. The problem with good stories is that they have been tested for over 5,000 years. The stories of Muhammad, the stories of Gilgamesh, the stories of the Buddha. These are like cultural, mythical stories that sustain people for thousands of years. Once you lose that, you know, you kind of become like psychologically and intellectually and emotionally orphaned. That you have no stories to rely on because, I mean, kind of like figure out what Sigmund Freud talked about regarding dreams. For the longest time, dreams were messages from the gods. I mean, you had to feel quite special and unique to wake up from a dream. Every dream had a message for you to decode. Then you have the 19th century, early 20th century, everything becomes meat, fleshy, you know, physical. Religion is out the window. Most of our ideas and ideals just, you know, trashed. Dreams, figments of your own imagination. They're just stupid. God, childish fantasies. All the stories that sustain human beings for thousands and millions of years, all trashed. Now you stand in the middle of this like storm called life, and you don't have any story to protect you. And somehow you say, well, I want to be happy. Well, fuck you, you don't really deserve that. You know, you've had all these forces for the past like almost 1,000 years destroying everything that used to protect human beings. You know, it's like you want to have sex, you also want to wear a condom, but the condom has been like, I don't know, it has 50 holes in it. You say, oh yeah, it's going to protect me. Really? You know, and have you heard of Auguste Comte? Auguste Comte is considered by many the father of sociology. He was married to a woman who went mad, so he dumped her in an insane asylum. He fell in love with like this 14-year-old girl, went to her parents and said, I want to marry your daughter. And they said, you're like a 45-year-old man, get lost, you know. Eventually she got sick and died, but he fell in love with her. He had argued that human psyche goes through all these evolutions, or human society. Out of your desperation, you look for gods, i.e. meaning. So you create a god by the name of Pan that lives in the forest, from which you get panic. You know, psychologically you find yourself in some uncertain situation, physically or emotionally. You don't really know what to do with it. All of a sudden, you realize you're beginning to sweat and panic overcomes you. Panic. So, every physical thing out there has like the spirit in it, anima. You know, it has magic in it. There comes a point where you say, you know what, I don't want my gods to be down here. I don't want to touch them. I don't want to taste them. I want my gods to be up there. So all of a sudden you create a different set of stories where you push your gods up into the heavens. You know, you have all the pantheons, all these Greek gods. At a certain point, human beings evolve and say, no, we don't want to believe like 50,000 gods. I want to, hello Leah, how are you? I want to just believe in one God. So from polytheism, you give birth to monotheism. You have one God, you have Yahweh, you have Jesus Christ, you have Elohim, you have Allah. And then comes the scientific revolution. You know, you read the Gospel of Mark, the guy goes nuts, and Jesus says, Satan is inside him. With the scientific revolution, when someone goes crazy, you give him pills. Science now becomes a messiah, you know. And what science does is it pokes holes into all the mythical stories. I mean, did you know that there are almost 20 figures who lived, whose birth was very much like Jesus, virgin births? I mean, imagine you walk into a classroom, you're a person of faith, but you also happen to have walked in at a certain moment in your life where you are open to possibilities. And someone says, and your life has been guided by Christian teachings. And someone tells you there have been all these figures, and they name you. You know, the instructor names all these people. Born of a virgin. You know, even if you look at astrology, for example, the sun moves into a house, 30th degree, leaves the house, 33rd degree. Wow, what does that mean? You know? And then you walk away saying, man, these are just like stories. Why should I believe in anything? And that's what you have in the 21st century. You can't believe in anything because nothing makes any sense. Consider your own tradition. Allah, an ancient Bedouin god with 2 kids, 2 daughters. Time gets into play, history happens, and all of a sudden no one talks about Allah's daughters. All you just have is Allah. You know. And the point I'm trying to make is the more scientific minded you become, the more you depend on your senses, your 5 senses, to kind of figure out how this world functions, the less you need answers from religion. And so all of a sudden comes this other narrative, the illusion that you can actually figure things out on your own. You can figure out love, you can figure out marriage, you can figure out this, you can figure out that. And the truth is, no. Our life is far too short, and our life is far too busy, and intellectually we are far too incompetent to sit for a good 2 hours to do research on any goddamn thing under the sun in a very serious way. So.
Sorry,
Oh, no, don't. You're not missing anything, Leah. Yeah, Tyler. Both hands are up. I'm sorry. Isabel, anything? Is it time to go? Oh, we have 5 minutes? Or 5 minutes past? We have 5 minutes. Well, Leah.
In Monday's class, we talked a lot about hunger.
Hunger?
Yeah, we talked a lot about hunger, hospitality, and importance. And I guess I wanted to know, how do you satiate hunger if you don't know
What you're hungry for? So I suppose it's something I've usually done in the past, like many years of teaching, but I haven't done it in this class or other classes. I don't want to do it right now because we're out of time almost. So superficially, approaching your question would be the following. Ilham has not had food since about maybe 4 o'clock this morning. By 12:30, maybe 1, maybe 2, if by this time her body has not yet adjusted to fasting, she's going to feel the pangs or the pains of hunger. Okay? So there is a certain hunger that you actually know how to satisfy it. Your body just needs food. Just give it to it. There is this other part of us that remains a mystery and falls victims to all sorts of the games that charlatans play. You know, that you just sign up for a philosophy class, you really just are looking for 3 units, and this is a required class for you to transfer to like Samuel Merritt or somewhere, and you're not really interested in ideas, right? And you don't even want to listen. You don't really care about any of these things. And ludus happens to you. And ludus is lust. And you can't be lustful for anything if you're not attracted to it. Okay? You're just playing with your cell phone, you're doodling on your phone, whatever the case may be. You lift your head up, you listen, and listening for the most part is very selective. Okay? In other words, all of us in this class have these buttons, the trigger point buttons, you know. Out of the 20 words that are spoken, you pay attention to 1 because it's connected to something about you and your history and your passions. And little by little, your interest grows. You know, and every time you come to class, your interest matures a bit more. And then you do something really interesting. You go to library here and you rent or borrow Plato's Republic. Something you've never done in a million years. The problem with this hunger is twofold. Okay? This hunger can either be manufactured, created by your own psychic environment, or it is manufactured by some force on the outside. Feelers. Someone like Albert Camus. Whether he's Algerian, French, Middle Eastern, Iraqi, none of those make any difference. The problem with Camus is that he was born as a feeler, as an introvert. And introverts always have a few screws loose. And they're looking for some wrench to tighten them. So they go all over the place. Another person happens to be a bit more rational, a bit more put together. You know that you're going to study biology, economics. You take a history class and all of a sudden, a hunger related to that particular branch of knowledge enters you. And little by little, it blossoms to the point where you say, you know what? I don't want to do computer science. I want to do history. This has nothing with your physical appetite, but intellectual appetite. And there comes a point where you say, you know what? I understand. I like the intellectual appetite and hunger, but for some strange reason, that particular part of me is satisfied. I want to feel the stuff. It's no longer about food of the belly or food of the mind. Now you're looking for food of the emotions. That's a very, very different thing. Now you find yourself saturated. Your belly is full, physical stomach, intellectual stomach is full, emotional stomach is full, and you say, you know what? I have this yearning and I don't know what it is. You want to call that your spiritual part, you can. You want to call it your soul. Labeling things don't really matter. But there is other part of you that now hungers. I guess the point is, at different stages of your own growth, you're always going to be hungry for different things. Let me end class with this poem. If you're looking for a way to satisfy hunger as a human being or as Leah, always remember this poem. رو سر بنه به بالین تنها مرا رها کن ترک من خراب شبگرد مبتلا کن از من گریز تا تو هم در بلا نیفتی بگزین ره سلامت ترک ره بلا کن دردی است غیر مردن کان را دوا نباشد پس من چگونه گویم که این درد را دوا کن There is a pain that is born with you, that comes out with you the moment you are born. You want to call it hunger, you can. And the only way this hunger can ever be satisfied, Leah, is when you take your last breath. When you die, hunger dies with you. If you're able to rewire the way you understand this stuff, and just think yourself as a student, where at every graduation, you begin to attend a different school, and you're in first grade, and you have to find the tools. Right now, you're young. Your only task is to figure out how to manage school. At a certain point, you will have a hunger for companionship. At a different point, you will hunger for having a family. At a different point, you'll probably hunger for divorce. At a different point, you'll probably hunger how to deal with loneliness. At a different point, you will have a hunger how to deal with old age. And how to deal with old age and having no one. It's never going to end. Right now, Leah, you have a healthy hunger inside you. You're young. You have energy. You're hopeful. You have lots of tools. But more importantly, you are young. As you get a little older, you'll begin to lose abilities. The tools you need to bring those dreams to life, you will lose them. And in their place, you will have despair. And somehow you need to be a good student and survive that. As you know, tomorrow is Professional Development Day. There is no school for you guys, no classes. So you can stay home and watch porn. I had a student many years ago that every time I use colorful words, she would get upset. She dropped my class after like the second or the third class meeting. You have a thick skin, good for you. So have a nice day. It's good to see all of you. Stay safe, healthy. Tell your parents I said hello. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. It's good to see you. You take care.
Proper response to assalamu
Alaikum assalam. Thank you.
Quick question. I rode my bike.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah. It's good to see you.